Folks, this week I'm just going to paint from imagination. It's Howard Jones here, and I'm just going to show you the importance of, I hope, practice by painting from imagination. I find myself doing more of this by default because I'm running out of, sometimes you run out of reference material. I have a large library of photos. The importance of painting from imagination, I'm pretty certain that my personal development made huge steps forward when I started painting from imagination, and that's because when you're painting from imagination you are literally dealing with everything you need to do to paint, other than making sure that you're copying something accurately. Now, when it comes to sort of learning the form of an object, the surfaces of a complex object like an animal, the human form, then that's probably best developed from sketching. But to learn how to paint, I strongly advise you to turn to painting from imagination. As I say, it exercises your knowledge of materials and how to use them. Your techniques will move forward rapidly. The only thing that might be amiss is that your ability to copy. Now, the ability to copy, the skill of copying, I'm not trying to play that down. It's very essential to understand, to get things right in your paintings. If you want to put a house over here, a car over in the middle of your street or whatever, yes, you need to understand form. But to learn how to actually paint, to use the materials that we have, then the best way forward is to paint from imagination. And so it teaches you the skills, it teaches you how to use materials, but perhaps more importantly, it gets that part of the brain working, your creative side of your brain working. Now that's like any other muscle in the body. If you are only working from photos, you're basically copying. You're really negating any opportunity when working from photos to exercise the creative side of your brain. So I can't recommend it highly enough to paint as much as possible from imagination. And don't worry about what the painting looks like. Sometimes you'll come up with a really nice painting, you look at it and think, wow, that just came out of nowhere, it just came out of my mind, it was an idea, an instantaneous idea that's turned out to look quite good. Other times you'll just look at it and think, well, that was just that really didn't do anything for you, but it will have done. It will have brought to the fore your skill levels, how you're using your paint, your materials, etc. So, as I say, I didn't learn how to use my materials. I didn't learn how to invent and create by the use of photos. Not at all. Photos are now what I rely on to get ideas from, and they're useful for conveying different scenes when I'm teaching other people to paint. But please give this a go. Make your next 4, 5, 6 paintings from imagination. Anyway, let's get something on here. So I'll start with a bit of blue to indicate a sort of sky area. Just get my blue here. And if it helps, I'll show you how I set this up. If it helps, I use a plate because you're not too precious about contaminating the other paint colours in your palette. So I'll just get I'm using a big 1.5 inch bristle brush, which is actually an oil painter, an oil painter's brush or acrylics. I just want to create some little bit of very subtle texture around in the sky area. Now if I want to make something appear, and because there's nothing there, is there? That's just a vacuous sort of sky-like area. But if I want to make a shape appear, then I have to cut down on the water. So I will pick up paint, of course, perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna from over here. Your colour choice is entirely up to you. Make sure that paint is mixed on both sides of the brush there. You notice I didn't pick up any water, only this more liquid mix from here. This is just mostly paint. And then I'll run in this dry effect about here. If I don't want it all to be dry like that, I'll scrub back and forth, and that'll help create a different texture. So perhaps that's a little area of water lying however far away from us at the moment. I think I'm going to scrape in a moment. I'll scrape the shape of a building. Still getting my ideas as to the depth and distance in the landscape back there. Yeah, that could be. Imagine yourself up in the Highlands, in Scotland, North Wales, Mid Wales, wherever you live. There's probably somewhere you can find. In most places, I should hasten to add, there's probably some mountains within perhaps it's a holiday destination for you. So before this gets a chance to dry out completely, instead of painting, waiting for this to dry and painting in the shape of a building, I think I'll just pop in a couple of hints of properties here. Perhaps they're closer to us than the water. Perhaps the water's over behind these buildings, and so just scrape those out. I've got a little series of videos on creating texture, which is what I'm doing here, matching the texture, the appropriate texture, to the distance, things like that, the proximity, because you don't want to put a dense, tight texture too far into the distance. Texture, busy textures tend to be something either sort of up close to us in the foreground or mid-ground. So let's leave those buildings for a moment, and perhaps what I could do is just run some water now back here to create a different type of sky at the horizon line. So this is just water. Didn't pick up any paint. There was probably a little bit of the paint left in it, but this is just water. That can give us those sort of striations, if you like, of a distant sky. I'm trying to remember to stay out of my building here. Let's go back to the building now that it's had a bit of a rest from my scraping, and I think what I'll do is I'll mix up. Let's put that big brush out the way for a moment and just turn my attention to a smaller brush. I'll turn my attention to smaller shapes, and I think I'm going to use a warmish colour, burnt sienna to start, and then a little bit of the cerulean blue, and we'll just put some shapes in and around our building here. These could be shrubs, shadow and shrubs. Just by making the areas immediately around my buildings, of course, I'm able to pop them out, make them appear more clearly, because that's just a tonal exchange from light to dark. See how what's happening here? You know, there's no way, if I hadn't painted with such freedom, there's no way that I would have happened upon that. Had I have happened upon that copying from a photograph, the odds are that that wasn't in my photograph. You know, so I'd get rid of it. I would think this was a disaster and stop immediately. Therein lies the secrets of watercolor. If you're painting from photographs and correcting all these things all the time, you'll never learn about that and how important that is when things like that occur. So there's a great example of why I see the importance of painting from imagination, is because what happens on your paper has nothing to do with what's in the photo that you're working from. If you were to be working from a photo, of course, So you'd miss it. You'd never learn that. You'd never reach that moment. You'd never have that moment occur where you would learn that. So I'm just going to bring some other things back down into here. And these don't have to be complicated. I could stop now. I could dot, and probably I will, just where I've got it to a point when I think, well, that's adequate. That's okay for me. I've learned a lot. I've developed this. I saw how I did that. It was because I'd put this paler sky in with lots of water, and the paint that was underneath it just drifted down and formed this lovely edge down here, which admittedly I manipulated a little bit just to help it look more like a row of trees. But as I say, these are the way. This is where you learn to paint. This is how you learn to paint. Now, just going to try to find some blue here. I've been a bit mean putting out my paint. I think we'll probably do a little bit more and leave it more or less like it is. So I'll do a series of these, folks, in the coming weeks, and I'm hoping after a few of them, and if you try them yourself, you'll see exactly what I mean about how you develop, how much quicker you will develop from allowing paint to do what it wants to do. And of course, once you've worked from this method of through imagination, then you can use it in your in replicating things and effects you see in your photos when you do start using photos. So it's a win-win situation. You're not going to not benefit by working from imagination. Okay, I think, you know, and they do become almost, sometimes you think, well, I'm learning so much here. You get into you get into that, well, nothing's precious. It's I'm learning so much here. You will take risks. You're more likely to take risks with this way of working when working this way. You know, you've learned that much from painting for just 5 to 10 minutes. How much more would you learn if you kept going? You might end up overdoing it, of course, but that's the value. You've got to remember the value of what you've learned. You may have something that you don't want to put in a frame, you don't want to see again, but what have you learned? Think about what you've learned. That's the all-important part of it. I'm just scraping and having fun now with this, using the metal ferrule of my brush here to put some texture down there. I think I'll just put one individual tree a little bit closer to us somewhere and have done with this. We'll have it about here somewhere. Just scrub back and forth. This technique of scrubbing back and forth like this probably came about from, well, I'm pretty certain it came about from painting from imagination. So, nice little conifer tree about here. We'll have it, we'll give it a little sort of area where it's got no growth so we can see the little cottages or the farm behind, and bring the foliage back near the ground there. And there we are. We'll put a little mount around that. I'm not saying I'm going to be rushing to my framers to put it in a frame, but one, I really enjoyed it. Two, it doesn't look too bad. And more importantly, three, I've learned again. I've just found something perhaps in this that I hadn't known before. And so the next time I'm working from imagination, perhaps it'll go in a completely different direction. Perhaps it'll be a quayside scene at the water's edge, perhaps a boat, a pontoon, whatever. I mean, it's endless. That's the great thing about working from imagination too. Another great thing about working from imagination is it's absolutely endless, that you can come up with anything that exists on this planet. But anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that's put a point across that you might consider, that might help you in your own personal progress and advancements. So till next time, see you then.